For someone who's building their career now, how could they find those opportunities and then, make the most of them?
You can replicate or emulate that with all the different resources we have available now.
I'm Steve Cummins, and this is CareerZCastVoices. With my co-host Marcio Saito, we deconstruct the playbooks of CEOs, educators, and disruptors to give you the edge in your professional journey. Today, we're joined by an expert in data sciences and digital marketing. He's a veteran of the global tech industry, someone who's seen the evolution of the digital landscape from the inside. It's a must-see episode for anyone developing a career in technology or interested in AI. Tomas Chi is a venture partner at Canastra Ventures. He has a career history that most can only dream of. He was one of the first employees at Google Brazil, where he played a pivotal role in scaling the company from its early stages. He then moved to New York, spent another 10 years with Google there as a data scientist, focused on the growth of Google's business globally. Tomas has a background in advertising and a deep expertise in data science with a specialized focus on the cutting edge of AI. He's also book smart. He holds an MBA from Duke University. He's completed executive programs at both Kellogg and Harvard. And today he's on CareerZCastVoices, helping us decode the modern workplace. Well, Tomas, thank you for joining us on CareerZCastVoices. First thing I noticed about yourself when I looked up on LinkedIn, you have a very interesting headline, which is always curious and eager for more. Tell me why that's important to you.
This is something interesting because it goes back to how I grew up. My parents allow me to have access to lots of types of content. So I would have lots of different types of magazines, different types of books, read the newspaper. Of course, I would start with the comics and then I would go for something else. So yeah, I'm just curious. And it turns out that I had the freedom for my parents to pursue a different career that was advertising. I was lucky that when I started my career, I did an internship at IBM. And at the time, as we had the dot-com bubble, we had a lot of internet startups. And I decided to take the risk.
I think it's true. We've been lucky in some ways. Those of us in technology in the last 20 plus years, we have seen a lot of changes. I work very close to Bell Labs in New Jersey, which is where a lot of this technology started, right? The transistor, lasers. And when you see what's happened since then has been pretty amazing. So I could understand how curiosity for you has underpinned that whole journey. So you mentioned you started out in advertising, which may have been unusual at the time. But then over your career, I know you moved through to data science. Tell us how you made that transition, some of the things that were key, how you gained the knowledge and trained yourself to be able to make those moves.
Yeah, I heard that Google was opening an office in Brazil. And then I looked at the job description and I said, oh, yeah. And I applied. I've been lucky to be in Google because when I started, it was about 12,000 people and a very open environment. And we have all this expectation, the web 2.0, internet penetration in Brazil was about 30-40%. So it was just booming. And then the company was growing super fast. And then we had people doing traditional ad sales and people marketing. And it was such a vibrant, rich environment that always had something to stimulate me. It coincided with big data. And I started to learn about SQL and I could do that on my own. And I started to see the benefits of that. And I started to incorporate it to my day-to-day. Then also I saw some peers because I was in a global corporation to see people using R. I said, oh, wait a minute, we have something here. Let me learn about this. And I could incorporate it to my job. That's how I was literally drinking from the fire hose. And as the company was growing, I was growing as well. And after 10 years in Brazil, I said, hey, let me find somewhere else that I can learn, grow, and expand myself. And it turns out that I moved to New York. I work in a global team that's we're helping global advertisers. And a lot of the developments Google had culminated in TensorFlow, a lot of machine learning. And then I could see computer vision. I could see deep learning. And I could learn more and so many different data sets. I remember that I saw how K-pop was being consumed by Brazilians, and it was completely outside of the bigger media, but I could see that happening through Google searches or YouTube videos. And then having this opportunity and learning about these newer technologies, for me, that was fascinating. And another thing that was a benefit for me from Google is that we had the access to so many brilliant minds, and it's contributed for me to grow and develop all the time.
So you talk about Google, there being a lot of opportunities there, right? And you were lucky that this happened, and so you make it sound as though it was very sort of fortuitous. But the reality is, a lot of people are in situations where those opportunities are there. For someone who's building their career now, how could they find those opportunities and then make the most of them?
I think you can replicate or emulate that with all the different resources we have available now. You have startup programs, you go GitHub repos, and you might find something interesting for you at personal level, and you can build on top of that for some skills that will help you in the future. One of the books I really liked is a book called Learning How to Learn from Barbara Oakley. Now we have a lot of people talking about upskilling for AI, and she has been talking over that for decades. We are in a time in society that you can apply the knowledge you have in one field into another field. And why I say that is that our educational system has been very silo, meaning that math is just math, biology is just biology, and they don't permeate or exchange. Of course, many instances, the result you have from that won't be instantaneous, but you have opportunity for that.
I think what Thomas said is so important because I was also at Google. And in more recent years, people are complaining to me, hey, Marcio, there is no opportunity for growth because Google became this big company and is not growing as fast as it grew in the last 20 years. I told people, if you want the same level of freedom to experiment in different things within a company, you need to join at the moment where the company is starting the exponential growth. But it's very difficult to guess because you never know if a small company eventually will become a big company. What Thomas said that I really love, especially with the move towards remote work and more dispersed work, people need to be responsible for their own growth and not wait for the company to provide the mentorship, the opportunities, the coaching, the training. All those things are now available. You can learn online, watching a podcast like this that doesn't depend on the infrastructure provided by the company. So I think that's very key.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's say that you see a video on YouTube and someone built something very interesting. Try to understand which were the layers of technology used and try to replicate on your own. A month ago, I was talking with someone that has an NGO. They are focusing in preservation and reforestation of Amazon rainforests. And we were just bouncing back ideas on how he could leverage the existing information to first be transparent of the progress. And we came to some possible scenarios in which you could use satellite imagery. And you have a lot of these data sets for free.
Right.
It is more about why not rather than you can't.
And I think it shows that even though technology has changed and communication systems have changed, the basic principles are the same, right? So you mentioned about silos, about talking, to people across continents, across subject matters. In some ways, it's tougher for us now because the algorithm tries to drive you down a single path, right? Whereas what we're saying is you actually want to follow multiple paths and zigzag around. But it takes me back. I made the comment about Bell Labs earlier. Bell Labs was actually, the building was architected to make sure that people from different departments had these sort of run-in moments. There was reasons for them to be walking along long corridors and run into people. If you shared a lab space, you had to share it with somebody from a different discipline. So I think the idea behind success has always been cross-pollination of ideas. We just need to find a different way to do it now that we have algorithms that are actually trying to get us back into silos. So one of the things you mentioned, so you moved at one point from Google Brazil to Google US. That to me sounds like another one of those opportunities that you had to grab and say yes, and it, opened up some different experiences to you. What were some of the differences in work culture and work habits that were a surprise to you when you moved from Brazil to the US?
Yeah, first I would say the size of the business, right? And then like you had the different sizes of teams, and also inserted in the American culture that I will not sugarcoat. Competition is really in the DNA. And I came from a different culture that you have a different way of thinking and dealing with these relationships. So I knew how to speak English, but I had within the culture to understand all the nuances, all the differences. And when people say one thing, what they mean, for me, that was a big aha moments of humility that, I made my way here, but how I built my career, how I learned is not enough to put me next level. So for me, that was the first thing. The other thing was the feeling of imposter syndrome, because I saw many of my peers, they were PhDs, they had so many specializations, and I was kind of, oh, I'm the one just trying to learn, I'm tinkering. So for me, those were the true main shocking aspects I had. And also another thing that was really valuable for me, especially coming to New York, is that as New York is such a melting pot, I could see a big, broad range of cultures and understanding how people behaved, what they meant, and which were the implicit and explicit ways to talk and work with these people. And then, one of the things I love is this book, Culture Map. This is fascinating to see how this author talk about this difference of the cultures and how you can navigate that.
Yeah, and it's funny because New York, right? We call it the melting pot because everybody comes in and is supposed to, immediately know how to act, and in reality, it's not a melting pot. There's a lot of different things going on at once. Marcio, I know you had a similar move. You moved from Brazil to Silicon Valley, maybe a few years earlier than Thomas did. Any experiences that you can share from that?
Well, the big difference was really access to information. I was developing hardware products at the time, and there was no internet. And the way for you to get the data sheet for a new processor, let's say, was you would send a letter to Intel. And about 3 months later, you get a paper book with the information you needed to develop your product. And that was the reason why the company I was working for decided we need to move to California. The point here is the world is getting smaller, but there is still concentration of expertise, concentration of development, concentration of capital. And while we all like to work remotely and in our own environment, seeking to be closer to people who are experts is still very important.
Yeah, I would just complement your point, Marcio. Yes, you have the development of technology and you have the application of the technology. So then goes to your point. Yes, developing the technology is important, but also understanding how people are applying or the challenges they have and how to execute that is key as well.
The technology might be developed someplace, but the most promising use of technology is somewhere else. And physical proximity means cultural proximity, and it gives you an edge in either building or finding the problems the technology can solve.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, that's one of the advantages you have working for a company like Google. You can build these networks within Google, right? I mean, certainly moving from Brazil to New York, you doubled the size of your network almost immediately. But, for people working remotely, if you're in a big organization, you can reach those people fairly easily. For someone, a lot of people, as they're building their careers, they're working in smaller companies, they're trying to follow entrepreneurship. How do they go about building those same kind of networks so that when they do need to talk to somebody about hardware, they know the person to reach out to?
Yeah, I have a piece of advice. I saw the name of the person from a podcast from MIT, and I heard her interview. I found fascinating. And I just sent her a LinkedIn message and I said, hey, it's amazing what you're doing. And she accepted me. So we know each other on LinkedIn and we exchanged a couple of messages. So what I'm saying is don't be shy. Of course,
Right.
you have a lot of no's, but eventually you find someone that's willing to sit with you, to exchange with you. If you want to have a very honest conversation, you can have that.
So the interesting thing is that the point you're making here is we consume a lot of information these days, right? Whether it's on YouTube or, we follow people on LinkedIn, and it's all input. Most people don't think of, well, let me try and start a conversation with this person, right?
Yeah.
And I think places like Substack are actually making that easier because it's more approachable. People are looking to have more of those kind of conversations. So I think it's good advice. Any thoughts on, how you initiate that? Because a lot of these people are used to just getting a bunch of inbound sales requests or pitches. What has worked for you in terms of creating these new relationships?
Well, I have instances that I started proactively. There were instances that I have a friend of a friend that introduced me and we were just bouncing back ideas. So it's not one size fits all. It might depend on what you want to do and be very authentic of what you would like to have from that, and don't think as just a transaction that's one and done. Yesterday, I talked with an entrepreneur and he admires Hannah Fry, the British physicist.
Yeah.
And he was just sharing with me how important she has been in his life because he could see from a different perspective. And I'm pretty sure that eventually he will try to hitch her out.
So Thomas' recipe is be curious, don't be shy, be authentic, and rather than sell something, be generous first, whether it's in recognition or in offering something, right? So I think that's a good recipe for all of us. We are going to a world where being authentic and being generous is important.
Yeah. And there's a networking group, the Startup Grind. They have chapters in a lot of cities. And their first principle is something along the lines of give before you take. The idea of being, contribute to the community before you start asking people for favors. So I think it does get forgotten that, not everything needs to be transactional. So Thomas, when I look at your background, I think there's one aspect of it that will seem very strange to Gen Z professionals. And that is you were with the same company for 20 years. You were at Google 20 years. It's fairly unusual now. It's probably not realistic for people at the early stages of their career to think they will be with the same company for 20 years. Yeah. Do you, looking back, do you see that as a positive thing, or do you wish that actually, maybe you moved around and tried some different environments?
What I can say is that I've been under the same corporation for 20 years, but not necessarily working with the same type of issues over the 20 years. Like I started like a sales working with smaller advertisers. Then I moved to work with medium-sized companies. Then I went to analytics. I understand that being 20 years within the same place is very unusual, but I was not necessarily doing the same role from time to time.
So at Google, you're saying is I stayed in the same company, but it was very easy not only to move countries, but to move roles and areas and functions. Do you think that mobility is still possible, or moving from company to company is the right advice?
I would say that there's no recipe. It's a lot of the choices you make. with the pros and cons. Many times is how do you see excitement with the things that you are doing? Because if you are not growing, if you're not being properly paid, yeah, I think next opportunity would be outside of the current company would be a consequence.
Yeah. And I think, for people that are really trying to grow their career, you need to have that growth mindset. So you're right, different paths work for different people. But if you want to progress, there's got to be an element of growth in it, whether that's growing by working in different environments, growing by learning new skills, by building your network. But you've always got to be thinking about, what's the next step, so that you don't get 10 years into something, you look back and think, well, I've basically been doing the same thing for 10 years.
Some people I don't judge.
Right. And that's a choice. And I guess I'm looking from the mindset of, if you're trying to build a career there, as opposed to doing a job, then the growth mindset is going to help you get there. So you certainly have grown as well, because now you're an early stage investor. You're focusing on AI enabled companies. As you work with these startup companies and these entrepreneurs, are there certain things you look for in successful founders that, you would say this is a sign of somebody who's going to be successful?
I would say the biggest temptation I've seen is that people talk too much about the tech specs rather than understanding very well the pain points. Don't get too stuck into the technicalities, because things will change. And what used to be good might not be good.
But
Well,
Thomas, I think one of the challenges for the entrepreneurs is that the investors are driving that, right? The investors are saying, if you're not doing something with AI, there is no money for you. So the investors are not necessarily looking for the problems. They are more focused on the technology in this case. How do you deal with that pressure?
Yeah, I think you're bringing a really good point, Marcio. And sometimes I joke that now we have this FOMO of AI. And AI is so broad, meaning that could be machine learning, could be deep learning, could be generative AI. So you have this kind of mystique, and people are trying to be cool. You had the calculator. You know how the calculator works. It has been there for decades. Works fine. I will use Gen AI to create a calculator. So, like having these moments of reflection, what do I really need to do for that?
Yeah. So there's been a lot of tech changes in the office. We're all tech people, right? And we brought up a few things today, things like before there was internet, before there was email. Now with AI, not so much from the entrepreneur point of view, but from somebody in the workplace. What do you think is going to be the impact over the next couple of years of AI as a tool set, or as a different way of doing things, in a regular office-based career?
Then for you as a professional is like, okay, how can I use this to help me to be a better professional? Like there are tools that I use to help me in my learning process.
That sounds as though we've come full circle back to curiosity, right? You have to be curious. You have to be open to trying these tools, and some of them will work, some of them will not, but you've got to be willing to adapt.
Yeah. And also being kind of ingenious, listening what's going on, and how can I apply this that's happening in one market into my context?
Yeah, interesting. Marcio, any questions for Thomas?
I think you said you spend less time worrying about what AI is going to change in the workplace and spend that time looking at how AI will make you better, make you more productive, more knowledgeable, find applications using that cross-pollination. And for a knowledge worker today, what is your advice on, let's say I'm a typical worker, I have used ChatGPT, but beyond that, I don't really know much about AI. How do you go about embracing AI and learning what AI can do for you?
Yeah, the next step, I would say, try some of these vibe coding tools. Something amazing that you could try just for fun. And explore what it would work for you and be more efficient on that.
Yeah. So move beyond asking questions to solving problems, right? That's the bottom line. Yeah, you can ask questions to a search engine, use AI to actually solve problems and automate the solution of problems.
Yeah.
Well, Thomas, thank you. This has been a fascinating conversation. We'll include your contact details in the notes for anyone who wants to connect with you and build their own network by reaching out and telling you how much they enjoyed the conversation. And thank you for spending time with us on CareerZCast Voices.
Yeah, I appreciate. Thank you for having me. The work that you are doing is very important for these newly grads that are facing such a big disruption.
So, Marcio, another interesting conversation. What were your thoughts and reactions from what he had to say?
Yeah, Thomas had this amazing journey, 20 years at Google. And as he said, Google was growing very fast. So I think he got a lot of insight there. The idea that you need to be curious, don't be shy to reach out. That's the only way you expand your horizons. If you're using AI as in ChatGPT, expand that into actually trying to solve problems, whether it's by vibe coding or by using one of the other tools. Stop thinking of AI only as something that answer questions, but something that help you solve problems. To me, those two things summarize what I heard today. And what about you, Steve? What did you find interesting?
Yeah, so I thought curiosity was sort of that common thread through. We opened with that as his LinkedIn headline, but clearly that has been his path, is to be curious about things. The other thing I noticed, it was all about his network. Every time we asked him a question, he would reflect on a conversation he had in the last couple of weeks with somebody. So he's obviously somebody that does spend a lot of time reaching out, talking to his network, maintaining his network, as it were, and then using those resources to come in. It's very tempting to only work with people in your particular area, particularly as the workforce is changing, job titles are changing. I think that idea of building a robust network, being able to talk to people outside of your sphere is just going to become more and more important. And despite the fact that he's had a career primarily within the same company for 20 years, I think he really showed that the building a broader mindset is really important.
Our generation expected the company, right, to provide us with the training, the mentorship, the advice, the careers. And we are now responsible for our own career development or learning. Yeah. We should not expect companies to provide that to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the last thing that even struck me, something I hadn't thought of, if you're consuming somebody's content, right? If you enjoy their YouTube videos, if you're listening to their podcasts, if you follow them on LinkedIn, just reach out and say hello and say, thanks for sharing this. I learned a lot. And I think that goes a long way.
And I am Marcio Saito.
And I'm Steve Cummins. And this is CareerZCast Voices. Please subscribe and follow, and we'll see you on the next episode.